North Korea is one of the most discussed, least understood countries in the world. Officially called the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, it occupies the northern half of the Korean peninsula in East Asia. On maps, it sits between powerful neighbors, China to the north and northwest, Russia at a short northeastern border, and South Korea across one of the most heavily fortified frontiers on Earth. To the west is the Yellow Sea, and to the east is the Sea of Japan. Its capital, Pyongyang, is the political, symbolic, and administrative heart of the state. But North Korea is not just a place on a map. It is the result of centuries of Korean history, the collapse of Japanese rule, Cold War rivalry, war, ideology, inherited dictatorship, economic crisis, and military-first politics. To understand North Korea, it helps to start before there was a North or South Korea at all. The Korean peninsula has been inhabited since prehistoric times, with human presence reaching back into the Lower Paleolithic period. Over centuries, organized kingdoms emerged, and early Korean states appeared in Chinese records by the first millennium BCE. Later, the peninsula became home to major dynasties and kingdoms, including Silla and Balhae, followed by Goryeo and Joseon. These states shaped Korean culture, language, institutions, and identity long before the modern division. For most of this history, Korea was not split into two hostile systems. It was a single civilization influenced by China, connected to Northeast Asian trade and diplomacy, but also determined to preserve its own political and cultural distinctiveness. The modern tragedy of Korea's division began in the 20th century. In 1910, the Korean Empire was annexed by Japan, beginning decades of colonial rule. Japan controlled Korea until the end of World War II, when Japan's surrender in 1945 created a sudden power vacuum. Instead of Korea immediately becoming one independent country, the peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. Soviet forces occupied the north, while American forces occupied the south. At first, this line was meant as an administrative division, not necessarily a permanent border. But as relations between the Soviet Union and the United States deteriorated, the temporary division hardened. Korea became one of the first major front lines of the Cold War. By 1948, the split had become political reality. Two separate governments were established, each claiming legitimacy over all Korea. In the north, the Soviet-aligned Democratic People's Republic of Korea was formed under Kim Il-sung. In the south, the Western-aligned Republic of Korea was established. These were not simply two administrations, they represented rival visions of Korea's future. The north built a communist state with centralized control and Soviet support, while the south developed under an anti-communist government backed by the United States. The 38th parallel became more than a line on a map. It became the boundary between two competing world systems, each armed, suspicious, and convinced that reunification should happen on its own terms. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, triggering the Korean War. The conflict quickly became international. North Korean forces pushed deep into the south, United Nations forces led by the United States intervened, China entered the war on the northern side, and the peninsula was devastated. Cities were destroyed, millions of civilians were displaced or killed, and the war left deep scars on both societies. In 1953, an armistice stopped the fighting, but it did not produce a peace treaty. That distinction matters. The Korean War technically ended in a ceasefire, not a formal peace settlement. The Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, was created as a buffer between the two Koreas, and it remains one of the most tense borders in the world. After the war, Kim Il-sung consolidated power in North Korea. He built a political system centered not only on the Workers' Party of Korea and the state, but increasingly on his own leadership. Over time, this developed into a comprehensive cult of personality around Kim Il-sung, later extended to his son Kim Jong-il and grandson Kim Jong-un. North Korea became a hereditary dictatorship, unusual even among communist states. Leadership passed within the Kim family, while official propaganda presented the rulers as indispensable guardians of the nation. The state promoted loyalty through schools, media, public rituals, monuments, and constant ideological messaging. Political power became inseparable from the mythic status of the ruling family. Central to North Korea's identity is Juche, the ideology associated with Kim Il-sung. Juche is often translated as self-reliance, but in practice it has meant more than economic independence. It has been used to justify political sovereignty, national defense, suspicion of foreign influence, and loyalty to the leadership. North Korea officially describes itself as a socialist state and holds elections, but outside observers widely describe those elections as uncompetitive and predetermined. The Workers' Party of Korea is the sole ruling party, and the state controls political life. The official ideology later evolved into Kim Il-sungism, Kim Jong-ilism, tying the state even more closely to the legacy and authority of the Kim family. North Korea's economy is built around state ownership and central planning. The means of production are owned through state-run enterprises and collectivized farms. In theory, many basic services such as healthcare, education, housing, and food production are subsidized or provided by the state. This model was supported for decades by relationships with other communist countries, especially the Soviet Union. But the economy was also deeply vulnerable because it depended on political alliances, centralized decision-making, and limited openness to global markets. The state prioritized control and ideological conformity, often at the expense of flexibility. This helped North Korea preserve its system, but it also made the country highly exposed to shocks when its international support network weakened. North Korea's isolation intensified in the late Cold War and became much worse after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. The collapse of a major patron hit the North Korean economy hard. Fuel, trade, aid, and technical support declined, and the country entered a severe crisis. Between 1994 and 1998, North Korea suffered a devastating famine, often called the Arduous March. Exact numbers remain disputed, but the human toll was enormous, and malnutrition continued to affect the population afterward. The famine exposed the weaknesses of the centrally planned system, the dangers of isolation, and the consequences of prioritizing regime survival over transparency. It also changed society, as informal markets became more important for survival. Another defining feature of North Korea is militarization. The country prioritizes the Korean People's Army in its allocation of resources, reflecting a strategy often associated with military-first politics. North Korea has one of the world's largest active-duty armies, with about 1.28 million soldiers, making it the fourth-largest active force globally. This is striking for a country with a relatively small population and economy. The military is not only a defense institution, it is central to national identity, political power, and regime security. Surrounded by perceived enemies and still technically in a state of unresolved war, North Korea presents its military strength as essential to survival. This posture also reinforces domestic control by keeping society organized around permanent emergency. North Korea's nuclear weapons program is one of the main reasons it remains at the center of global security concerns. For Pyongyang, nuclear weapons serve several purposes. They deter outside attack, strengthen bargaining power, and symbolize technological and military achievement. For other countries, they create serious risks, regional instability, arms races, missile threats, and the possibility of miscalculation. North Korea's nuclear status has led to sanctions, diplomatic crises, and repeated negotiations that have failed to produce lasting denuclearization. The program also reflects the regime's core logic. If survival is the highest priority, then nuclear weapons are seen by the leadership as an ultimate guarantee, even if they deepen isolation and economic pressure. North Korea is also widely condemned for its human rights record. Organizations such as Amnesty International have described it as among the worst in the world. The state tightly controls speech, movement, media, religion, and political expression. Independent civil society does not function as it would in open systems, and dissent can carry severe consequences. The government presents itself as democratic and socialist, but outside observers describe the political system as totalitarian, with power concentrated in the ruling party and the Kim family. These human rights concerns are not separate from the country's geopolitics. They are part of how the regime maintains authority, by limiting information, controlling institutions, and preventing organized opposition. Despite its isolation, North Korea is not completely outside the international system. It has been a member of the United Nations since 1991 and also participates in groups such as the Non-Aligned Movement, the G77, and the ASEAN Regional Forum. This creates a paradox. North Korea is deeply isolated, heavily sanctioned, and diplomatically distrusted, yet it still engages selectively with the world when useful. In 2024, the DPRK formally abandoned efforts to reunify Korea, marking a major shift in how it defines its relationship with the South. North Korea today is the product of division, war, ideology, dynastic rule, economic struggle, and military strategy. Its isolation is not accidental. It is a central feature of how the state survives. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.